The theme of audiobooks really needed a follow-up, just because in my last video about the theme, it seemed really engaging, and now I've listened to more of them. Hi, my name is Øystein and I'm trying to become a bookworm, and that's why in this video we're talking about audiobooks. Some months have passed since my first video about this topic, and in that video I explained what I thought about my first experience with audiobooks and how I thought it felt like cheating for me, just because it felt too easy nearly. But since then I've spent many hours listening to audiobooks and I've made up some new thoughts, so today I thought I would share them with you. First of all, I find audiobooks to be a great way of finding new authors. Not just because I find listening easier than reading, but also because I actually find DNFing easier when listening to audiobooks. I do not know if I've DNF'd a book yet, but I've listened to the intros of many of these books and I just stop without any hesitation. And I find this way more easy to do with audiobooks rather than physical books. Maybe it's the fact that I go to the bookshelf, take the book out, have to physically open it and start reading, which takes a bit of concentration, versus just taking up your phone from your pocket, press play and then see what you think. And for me, I don't know what I think about it, but it's way more easy to find the book that fits your mood then and there, for me at least, just because when I pick up a book, I think that this is the book I'm going to read now. And if it's not the right book, I'll take a lot more time with it than with the audiobook. With the audiobook, I can decide within 1 minute or so. This is sort of my latest discovery and something that surprised me a bit. But when I thought about it, I think it makes sense. To me, it's easier just skipping a book when it's on your ears rather than in your hands. But I do think that I can be better at DNFing books, physical books, or just read the first sentences and see if it fits my mood. And lately I've also been thinking about the concept of big books, just because it's way more easy to pick up a big book on your ears rather than in your hands. Not the physical part, but just it being so time consuming reading a physical big book. And then it's easier for me at least, thinking that I can just listen to it bit by bit, and in some months I'm finished. Earlier this year I got this really chunky book from Jon Michelet, and I thought about reading it, but I thought I didn't have the time, it would mess up my reading schedule. Then I thought I would listen to it, and the recording time is about 40 hours. But when I thought about it, I'm much better at listening in short moments rather than reading a couple of pages. Well, I'm good at both now, but I find thinking about reading a couple of pages at a time and listening to a couple of pages at a time, I prefer the listening. So that book I will probably start listening to at some point. Also, I like to save the shorter books for my physical reading just because it makes me feel good. Also, I buy a lot of books online and I do not always know which books I'm gonna get or how they're gonna look. And this is something I thought about when I listened to Pet Sematary. I thought I would read Pet Sematary for quite some time, but when I got it in the mail, it was so small that I didn't want to pick it up, just because it had an annoyingly small font. So when I found it on my audiobook app, I thought this was a great way of just getting rid of one of my books from the non-read shelf and over to my have-read shelf. And that was a great new finding. So each time now, if I get a book that I just don't want to read because of how it looks, I can listen to it and put it in my shelf either way. But I am now more conscious about which form factors I'm ordering. Then there is the most interesting thing on this list today, and that is the language, because I both listen to books in Norwegian and English, and I have found some things that I find interesting myself at least. The first thing is that dialects irritate me way more in Norwegian than English. I believe this is because you associate the dialects with different people or events or anything like that in Norwegian, but I'm way less experienced with American or English dialects, so I wouldn't know where they come from. If someone has an answer to why this is a thing, just comment below. I would love to hear it, because this is something I spend way more time on thinking about than I should. With my first audiobook, I thought that audiobooks weren't a thing for me, I guess, but I'm now very sure that it was because the author herself read the book and had a very intense way of reading. so that sort of spoiled it for me. The book I really enjoyed thinking about afterwards, so I don't think it was the book's fault, rather the way it was made. And the audio quality differs quite a lot, both from a technical standpoint and the person reading the book, and I have had to reject quite a lot of books recently. And this is something I couldn't pinpoint before I had heard a lot of books, just because I wasn't aware of how great the quality could be in some books. Recently I listened to The Court of Thorns and Roses, and I really loved the audio quality and the person reading the book, and then I understood how much it could mean for the book and for my experiences of it. This being said, I'm still wondering about how it would have felt reading the book versus listening to it. So each time I finish a book, I'm wondering about how many stars I would have given it if I read it myself. But this is something that will never change. This also differs for which mood I'm in when I actually read a physical copy as well. So we'll never know, but I'm always thinking about, would it have been better if I read it myself? Life is hard. So this year I'm actually not counting audiobooks as reading, just because the actual physical reading is what's hard for me. As I said earlier, it's easier listening to it, for me at least. And thus this year I'm not counting. Next year I will definitely count the audiobooks, just because reading goals feel stupid sometimes. How I solved this issue on Goodreads is that each time I finish an audiobook, I just set the reading date to the 31st of December 2021. And that will be my most successful reading day ever at the end of the year. But next year I think I'll just log them as usual reads. I'm also buying the physical copies of the audiobooks if I find them thrifted, and that feels great, especially if you've listened to a lot of audiobooks and suddenly you find several of them thrifted and you can just fill up the space in your shelf with these books so it looks better. At least this is something that keeps my reading spirits up. And something quite funny happened a little while ago, because many of my podcasts were sent to this other app where I had to pay to access them. And I thought, this is the moment when I can start listening to a lot more audiobooks, and so I did. So a lot more time is now spent on audiobooks rather than podcasts, and it's all by coincidence. But still, that means that I'll form a relationship with a lot more authors, which I'm looking very much forward to. All this to say, I'm going to continue listening to audiobooks, because it's apparently easier for me to find books I enjoy on audiobooks rather than physical copies. So if you have an audiobook you would like to recommend, please comment below. And thank you for watching this video. If you have thoughts on the theme, please also comment that below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!